everyone, I'm Jim Seconde. Thank you for inviting me to talk at PHP Southwest again. This is the second time I've been here. Here's some gubbins about me before we start. If my Stream Deck works, there we go. So really, do you have to just don't pop up the thing? So yes, hello, I am Jim Seconde. I founded Brum PHP, the Birmingham PHP user group, or the continuation of it from PHP West Midlands. I co-run and host Fusion, which I run with the Fusion team, which is a sort of a meetup but sort of conference. We've got another virtual one coming up. And most importantly, I'm developer relations at Jump24, which is a Laravel partnered studio. Some links for you there. Jump24's website, my employer, if you want to check out the kind of work we do. My personal website, devtheatre.net. There's blog posts and stuff like that. And if you're a music geek, then you can go and check out the radio show that I do, which is full of really random records. I've just dropped my last one, which includes Daphne and Celeste, their latest record, which is actually really surprisingly good and J-pop influenced. If you want to use the Horrible Bird website, you can at me there, at Seconde. If you are a middle-aged white man in a suit, then you can go on LinkedIn and contact me there. You won't find much information, but I will respond. And if you want to check out my my graveyard of discarded side projects, then you can check out my my dumpster fire of crap and my GitHub. So you didn't come here to hear about all that spiel. You came out here for something else. Debugging. My previous talk was very animated when I brought it to PHP Southwest, right? So this one's completely different. This is about debugging, which is not the most interesting subject. So you've got to come up with some sort of angle, and you wouldn't have thought that debugging had an angle, but it does. And I found it, and I like to call it sports casual debugging, and it's named after the master of sports casual, Mr. Alan Partridge. This is lost on. I can imagine when I do this for PHP user groups in America, they're not going to know what I'm talking about. But the last time I did this talk, it was for Nordev, so I did it to the people in Norwich, and there he is, just slinging over, Alan Partridge slinging over his lovely jacket and his salmon pink stroke millennial pink. Anyway, this is how it goes, and this is why I call it sports casual debugging. Here are 3 PHP debugging techniques that we use. We don't necessarily all use, but most of us will probably have encountered or used these sort of every day, right? Var dump, DD dump, and Xdebug. So the sports casual thing is you can compare these to cars. You can't really, but that's my angle. So var dump. We've all seen var dump. Var dump is Ford Mondeo. So it appeared in the 90s, mid to late 90s. It's littered absolutely everywhere in all the code bases. You see it every day. Look at it. It's the very definition of vanilla. Look at it. It's nothing, is it? It's just it does it, but it does it. You get in it and it goes from A to B, but not very interesting. So yeah, it gets the jobs done, but it's not very pretty to look at. DD and dump from 2 of the leading frameworks. BMW Mini, and picked this because it's based on an old design, taken over by industry leaders, and souped up underneath the hood to make for a very nice debugging experience. Xdebug, which is the point of this talk, I've gone for the Audi TT. By the way, just so everyone knows, I can't even drive. I'm learning to drive, so most of this is kind of lost. I'm just doing it for the fake comedy element. But an Audi TT is sporty and sleeky, right? It's sleeky. I said that last time. It's sporty and sleek. But whilst looking very, very flash and being having very good German engineering, but also a lot more affordable than you think, which is part of the talk. And that is all of the comedy as this talk, because there's no comedy to be had in debugging, and I'll be honest, that's me really searching because I technically have a degree in stand-up comedy. Right, so tooling as a process. Let's get on to the actual, like, you know, this is a live demo session, right? So we're actually going to show you Xdebug in action, right? At Jump 24, as a Laravel partner, we do continuous integration, and we ship code, and everything about all of the pride of our work is all about all of the tooling that we use, right? And we make selections, and we do R&D to like which things should we use. So there's, in our current stack of things that we use to ship quality code, here's some, you know, classic things of like, okay, you know, we use Composer, but PHP unit and code sniffer, we use Grunt PHP to run as the task runner for all of these things. That every single commit that you push up, it runs all those things. So for our local development, we use Docker. We use Atlassian Cloud because I think we should probably we should probably change that now. Hands up if you've had a Bitbucket error in the last day. We adhere to PSR standards, PSR 2, PSR 12, and that's enforced by PHPStorm that we use, that Grunt PHP runs. We obviously use Composer, and Composer does various bits in our pipelines and our DevOps tooling. Grunt PHP, as I mentioned, runs on the pipeline. It doesn't just run for deploys; it runs for every commit, right? And that's for the Atlassian Cloud in Bitbucket for the Bitbucket pipelines. But we also have a project, and we'll get on. I'll show you the actual project we're working on is not an Atlassian Cloud one. It's on GitHub, and it runs in Circle CI. So you'll be able to see some of that in action. We practice TDD because everyone should be doing that, and who's not practicing TDD because you're mad. And we use CI tooling, can be Jenkins, can be Circle, whatever's appropriate for the project we work on. So with all of this in mind, what we were considering about Xdebug is, should Xdebug as a tool be part of all of the process that we use to write and ship code? That's the question that we asked. And the reason why we suddenly started asking this about Xdebug, given that we've rolled out all of this tooling, we've got all of our processes in place, is quite obvious. So let's go over Xdebug itself as a tool. This talk is all the fault of this man here, Derek Ruthens, who has spoken at PHP Southwest just before lockdown, I think Lee was saying. And I say it's his fault because Xdebug 3 is out now, and he put out a tweet and said, if you don't use Xdebug for your debugging and development, then you're an amateur. And there was a massive storm about it all, of like, oh my god, blah blah blah. But it got everyone talking about Xdebug, and it got us talking about that. We looked at it and went, oh, it was one of those Slack conversations. Oh, did anyone see the thing about Xdebug last night? Well, oh yeah. But then it got us thinking, well, like, but we don't use it for anything. But with all of our pipelines and everything, should we be using it? What do we know about it? What? So we pulled together and thought about, like, what are your thoughts on Xdebug? I think all of us knew that it'd been around for years. It's been around since 2002 for the first release, and mostly people say the same thing, that it's complicated to set up. This one, like, seems to be like a given of, right. So I had to. It's like it's an extra library on top of extension on top of PHP, but then you've got to do the INI file, and you've got to configure it all, and then the server, and then you've got to get the listeners, and the listeners. If the command line is like this, you do it like this way. If you do it via Chrome or Firefox, you need to get a bookmarklet that does a bookmark. All of it just, like, everyone went, I remember it being really complicated to set up. And if it was really complicated to set up when we were using LAMP stacks back in the day, going back, 6, 7, 8 years, I mean, we've got Docker for rolling out stuff. We're not completely mad, so we haven't gone let's use Kubernetes to deploy like a monolith. But we've got Docker now. So with Docker in our local environments, is that just not going to make setting up Xdebug as a server on top of PHP more complicated? That's the main thought that everyone had. And also, the key question that the key feedback that everyone always says is, given the complexity of this is supposed to have, and the investment, and I'll get onto investment later, but why not just use die dump, or why not just use var dump and just to kill the session and just dump out stuff? So with that bearing in mind, with that as our kind of like okay, this is what we think. So why don't we give it a test drive and let's try it out? So we did, and because it's an open source project that we used, which is called Order, and there's the link for the GitHub repo for it. Order is a open source Laravel application with Vue to let merchants take online payments and do deliveries. And it was built in 6 weeks because of COVID. So it's open source, so you can deploy it yourself. And also you can go onto our hosted version of it and just sign up. It's free. But a perfect research and development project, really, to see if we can incorporate Xdebug into our process, right? Here's the stack of what Order is built in. So like I said, we're a Laravel partner. It's in Laravel. We're gradually rolling out Vue.js to slowly replace bits of the Blade templates that are in there. It's hosted on GitHub. There's a link. Circle CI runs on all of the unit tests and all of that. And then if you want to run it locally, we have Docker. So with that in mind, let's go and have a look. So we want to install, first things first, we want to install Xdebug. I'm going to show you the code base. The code base is running with Docker up and running at the moment. Okay, here's the front page, right? Here's the front page. Our URL is ukrestaurants.test, and there's the page. So we need to get Xdebug into this. So first of all, I need to talk a little bit about the setup that we have. We have, if you look at the panel on the left-hand side, you can see that we have Docker files for our containers. Our containers are a fairly standard LAMP stack. So we've got MySQL running, we've got Nginx, and we've got PHP with its own Docker file. The queue, I'm not sure about whether we have like Amazon like SMS or whatever, SQS on production or something like that. I can't remember. And we've got Redis for the standard stuff that Redis is used for. I think we do some clever stuff with Redis as well, actually, rather than just session caching and things like that. So bearing in mind with all of that, we have a Docker file for all those. If we look at the Docker file and open it up, here is our PHP Docker file. We're using PHP 7.4 for Order at the moment. We're using the FPM container. So Dan mentioned, we're just talking for those of you who came in late, Dan and I briefly were talking about Imagic. We actually have Imagic on this because we do some resizing on the fly and things like that. And there you can see on line 14. So installing Xdebug itself in a Docker container. This bit is fairly simple in that it's a one-liner. I mean, it doesn't do everything, but the first thing you want to do is install it in the Docker container, and you have to use pickle. So pickle install Xdebug. You can't install Xdebug really with Docker in an environment and a pipeline like this any other way. You probably could, but it'd be really going around the houses. Just use pickle. You could probably do some mad stuff with pear, but don't do that. That'd be an interesting question whether you can actually do that or not. That installs Xdebug when you build into the PHP container. So that's your first thing. The second thing is that will enable Xdebug, but you've got to configure it. And to configure it is, I mentioned PHP INI files. So because it requires an INI configuration, what you need to do is create a custom INI file and then inject it. So we'll do that by, in the same file as the Docker file, let's call it xdebug.ini. And I'm going to paste this in. And the reason I'm going to paste it in is because when I tested this originally, this talk, I typed it all and then explained it, and then there were typos and the whole talk fell apart. So I'll just explain what these switches are on the INA. Zend extension, it's an extension of PHP, and we're using the Zend engine. Thank you. Hurrah for PHP 8 when it comes out. I mentioned bookmarklets in your browser. and the slightly convoluted way of, like, it felt fiddly, of trying to use these bookmarklets where your browser sends a signal to the, I can't even remember how the relationship works. It listens, like Xdebug sends it out and it listens, and then the browser says, oh, I'm going to start the session from here. With remote enable and auto start, switch to 1, and I didn't know that you could do this until we looked into it. It brings the session into the foreground for whatever IDE is listening to it. The remote port is set to 9001 because if you don't change it, it defaults to 9000, and PHP FBM runs on 9000, so don't do that. The remote host on Mac, because this is a Mac, is host.docker.internal, which was probably, I think, is the biggest lifesaver, because when I originally set up Xdebug years ago, doing things like exporting environment variables in Bash to try and like hook up the IDE to Xdebug was a nightmare. This here, this host.docker.internal, this is a reserved IP address, so, and it's the entrance to the Docker stack. That's pretty cool. We did it the last time that I gave this talk at the Norfolk developers. We tried to find the Windows Linux equivalent, and we couldn't find it. There are a couple of other things we tried. It is well documented. There is a site called learnxdebug.com, which is by Matt Stuffer, who owns Titan, another Laravel partner agency. Have a look at the website he did. If you want to find anything about setting all of this up, it's all in videos. If you want to get like the remote host and the IP address and things like that. Anyway, so that is the INI file. So now we need to inject it. You can inject it in the Docker file if you want to, but the way that I'm going to do it is via Docker Compose, because it's just, well, to be honest, it's kind of preference. So if we look at Docker Compose, this is our compose file, where someone pointed out recently that if you're not familiar with Docker, this is obviously like going to be a bit of a handful. But essentially, Docker Compose is is like a YAML markup of stringing together all of the containers of your application. So you can see like services Nginx. This says the Nginx web server looks like this. It's going to be called this. It uses an image from the Docker Hub. It uses this volume, which we're going to mount on it. It uses port 80 and 443 for HTTP and HTTPS, things like that. The important thing here is in the PHP volume here, I'm mounting the application that I've got on my file system locally, and I'm mounting it to var w vhost. So now I'm going to inject the new INI file that I've just created, and I can do it like so. Add a new volume, and that looks right. So the file system locally is Docker on this app is Docker PHP Xdebug.ini, and I want to copy it to the conf.d folder in the PHP container. Everything that is in that configuration folder, that directory, is taken and passed by PHP runtime. So those are your configuration, and so that will inject your configuration. And one more to make this work with Xdebug, because I said this is turbocharged with Xdebug and PhpStorm. You can find videos in the aforementioned Xdebug, Learn Xdebug website if you want to use VS Code and things like that. But we're using PhpStorm, so you have to jump through this horrible hoop, which I hated. When you listen for Xdebug connections on PhpStorm, it will listen to anything. It'll listen to anything on the port that you've selected. So in order to actually get it to work and map correctly to the file system that you have on your project, you need to tell it the IDE what project it is that you're working on. So you do it like so. It's an environment variable, and it's called PHP IDE config. So in this container, we add this environment variable, and it looks exactly like that, where it's server name equals, and then wherever the incoming request is coming from. If you don't add that line, then PhpStorm will not know where to map the incoming connection to. So you might have 5 different workspaces open, and it starts receiving stuff, and it's like, I don't know which project this is from or what URL it is. You need to map it manually. That took like 2 hours to figure out myself, which was really quite painful. The last bits of setting up on the IDE are I mentioned the IDE config. You need to set up web servers. I'm going to go into preferences here. I'm going to be honest, I really don't like the way that PhpStorm handles its web server stuff. I think it's really convoluted, and I tend to ignore it. Previously, I have ignored it, and now when it comes to debugging, you need to map the incoming request to the file system that you've got mounted. So you do have to delve into this, unfortunately. So it's under, can I move you? You're not going to let me move, no. It's under languages and frameworks. Is it this? There we go. It's under languages and frameworks, PHP servers. And this is where we set a web server up. So you give it a name. That's an arbitrary name, can be anything. And give it your host. This project is uk-restaurants.test. So the etc hosts file is set to that. Port 443, because, you know, who's using HTTP to serve something these days? We're using Xdebug because Xend has its own debugger, which absolutely nobody uses, I don't think. And then the last key bit with your file directory is you need to tell the incoming request where to map to. If you don't do this, it will completely fall over, because you're basically telling an incoming request from a web server where to point to a PHP file. When you do this out of the box, it will automatically think that you're going to the public directory, which makes sense because that's the entry point to your application, be it Laravel or Symfony or even Slim, doesn't matter. So you need to remap it. So what I've done here is on the left-hand side where you've got users, Jim sites order call. On the right-hand side is the mapping in the Docker container, which is var w vhost. And that's the important bit. It's not vhost/public /vhost. That is the entry point to the application. So you can map it one directory up. If you don't do that, it will fall over. Well, it won't fall over. It will take the incoming request, but it will do really. You'll have to map it each time, and it won't work. The last thing is the on the YAML file on the Docker Compose. I told Xdebug to on the ini file. Sorry, I told it to map to ports 9001. So you need to tell. PhpStorm to listen on 9001. So you do that. This is fairly simple. You just go to the search bar and type in Xdebug. Install Xdebug. There we go. There we go. Where it's highlighted there. Xdebug listen on port 9001. If you don't do this, you might fall into conflicts with PHP FPM. Some people sort of mansplain to me that you won't, but I don't really agree, and I think you will. Everything's kind of set up. The only thing that isn't set up is the fact that I have this project running already. So as you can see, order is running, the application is running. So with that in mind, I need to rebuild with Docker Compose now. So if I go to my command line, if I go Docker processes, there it is, stack of 4. Docker Compose, and it is Docker Compose, not Docker Composer every time. Docker Compose down. Stop the containers. Don't worry about that. Docker, we'll get onto that later. Docker Compose up, run it as a daemon, build it. Off you go. And it's built some stuff. Docker processes were running. So let me just check again before I have to do the sort of the whole like, did it work? That's the IDE configs in there. The Docker file has been changed with pkl install Xdebug. The ini files are there and have been injected via Docker Compose. Cool. Now is proof in the pudding time. So easiest way to do this is to SSH into our PHP container. So Docker execute, what's our container called? UKR PHP, UKR PHP bash. That's it. PHP. Let's put the right switch version. Hooray. So that's now a bit like, you know, when you have opcache, on PHP, when you've got Xdebug, there's the line underneath. That's running in the container. So the next thing is to check the web side of things is running all good. And we're going to do that by running PHP info. So in my application, if I go to the entry point of public or index.php, there we go, index.php, before booting all of the Laravel system here, I'm going to stop it by doing PHP info and die dump. I'm going to just do die because I want to do vanilla. Vanilla. Why not? If I access my application now, that should die, but it should give me PHP info. So let's try it. Reload the page. Great. Nothing's happened. This is where I start to panic. Right. DD test. I mean, I'm running the containers, so. Wow. Okay. So for anyone thinking at the moment, this is basically like my worst nightmare. Where I'm like, this really shouldn't be doing this. What about that's the public folder? What about app.php? This is bootstrapped. Die! Stop loading. Die! Wow. Okay, that was the first time that I tried to use the public in the index public, which like didn't work at all. There's probably a really obvious reason for that. So die. Let's try it again then. Before you die, I want to do PHP info. There you go. You learn something new every day. Let's zoom in because that probably looks quite small to everyone. So here's our PHP info. You can see that the Zend engine here is running with Xdebug as well. And if I do a search for Xdebug, we can already see where that's highlighted at the moment. It's got additional INI files passed. It's passed xdebug.ini. If I scroll down further, you can see that the extension has been enabled. Important things that have been passed in were the entry point via the IP, which is host.docker internal. There it is. And remote enable is on and auto start is on, which means that if I set a breakpoint on an application, it should, all being well, bring it to the foreground from the browser and just stop everything and start a debug session. Oh, right. Okay. Bearing in mind, I'm just going to, so for that's setup done. So let's just have a quick recap of the setup. Important things for setting it up. In a Docker file, Pickle, you have to use Pickle because it's it's an operating system level dependency. Can't use anything else. Make sure you create a custom PHP INI. I injected the Xdebug environment variables with Docker Compose. You can do it in a Docker file. Doesn't really matter which one you use. The IDE config server name equals something that equals your project. Horrible. And that goes in Docker Compose. I mean, you could probably find another way if you want to put it as part of the pipeline, some bash, like something, or you could even just export it in the Docker file instead of Compose. Make sure you set the remote port to 9001 and have PhpStorm listen on 9001. And the remote IP for a Mac anyway is docker.internal.host. There are equal equivalents in Linux and on Windows. So you came here to see debugging. Let's do actual debugging now that we've got to this point. So I mentioned breakpoints, which is the start of any debugging process. So we need to find an actual, I'm going to show you an actual point to start, to actually start doing a debug process. So first of all, I need to get rid of that and return the app. And I'm horribly zoomed in. So this is me logged in. I'm just going to log out and log back in again, just for sort of proof of concept. So you go to merchant login. I'm going to pretend that I'm selling some stuff. By the way, all the lines and things like this is because this is a development copy, and I've not updated it since, and it does look a lot nicer. Just to give kudos to our amazing designer, Annika, who is brilliant. Here is the login. I've logged into a dashboard, and you can see there's some orders and stuff like that, right? So this, with the bar at the bottom, Symfony has a similar thing to this. That's the profiler, which is quite cool. Laravel has a similar kind of thing. If I go to the root that I've accessed, you can see that the URI is admin/dashboard, and the root is called admin.dashboard, and you can see that it uses a controller called dashboard controller. So we're going to go to dashboard controller. Here we go. Close this stuff because that's done. And I'm going to access dashboard controller. There it is. So our dashboard controller, the way that we've structured our application is that we use invocable controllers everywhere. So there's loads of controllers all over the place. Some of you might love that idea and some of you might absolutely hate it. The important thing is there is invoke, there's the entry point to our controller, and then it's going to do some stuff. So instead of it doing some stuff, I'm going to tell it to stop. So on line 30, you click just in this margin here. That's really annoying. Bear with me, because we do this the right way. PhpStorm. PhpStorm has a horrendous bug in it, and I really hope that someone from JetBrains watches this at some point. But the breakpoint I just set is supposed to have a lovely little icon. And when you've had it open a while and you change settings, it stops showing up. Look, there it is. On line 30, there you go. See me sort of clicking and clicking it. When you set a breakpoint in that little margin on the mouse, then your little thing says, here we go. It's red, highlights the line, and that's your breakpoint. So with that in mind, that's the right controller for this route. Up here, I'm just clicking it now. Kind of. I don't have. I need to be in person so that I can have my little laser pen. But there's a switch on listener that switches on connections, right? So we have everything in place. So if I reload the route, it should stop. Let's close that. Refresh. And then I breathe a massive sigh of relief. It stopped and the debug panel has come up. The debug panel is this thing here. And this thing is absolutely amazing. And I'm going to just talk you through like the features of the panel, right? And how it works. So first of all, on the left, for those of you familiar with the, if you're a PHP developer, you all have seen this, but when there's a bug, when there's an exception thrown, the application falls over and you get a stat trace. And the stat trace is, if it's Symfony or it's Laravel or it's Cake or it's whatever it is you're using, gives you the stat trace. If you want to, you can manually sort of create the stack backtrace. That's a feature of PHP. It's the same with anything if you use JavaScript or if you use Python. What's nice about this is that is the stack trace effectively on the left-hand side. It's not the stack. Well, it's not the stack trace because it's not going back. These are the actual frames of what's being called right now. So I've set that breakpoint on line 30 of dashboard controller, and if I scroll through it, that's the actual what's been called so far. But it's navigable, so I can go through absolutely everything. If I go to the bottom and I click on it, the editor will take me to the precise moment in the code that everything is called. So you can see there's an incoming request, and then it has like the capture on a request object. As I scroll through, this is all completely dynamic. So I can dynamically scroll through the entire Laravel framework as it's happening to find out what's going on at any particular moment in time, which is pretty awesome. The panel to the right of it is the variables panel. And the variables panel also, alongside the call stack, updates in real time as well. So if I'm on dashboard controller line 30, which you can see highlighted there. If I step back there, the variables panel will update to what the variables look like at that moment in runtime. So you can continue it. So for debugging purposes, you can pretty much see every moment of state in all of the PHP thread at that point, which is very cool. But that's how a debugger should work. But a lot of people are very surprised that you can do that. I happen to think it is awesome though. Step controls. These are fairly sort of bog standard. Even if you've not encountered this with PHP, you would have probably done in JavaScript, I imagine. If like depending on sort of like I was gonna say how experienced you are, but how much you've played around really. You've got step over, and I'm going to go to the dashboard controller for this actually. So where our breakpoint line is. So there's our line on line 30, and if you step over, executes that line, runs onto the next line, and it will continue to do that every time. The important thing with step over is it steps over the code and runs the next line of code in the frame that you're in. So the line, for instance, line 30 that we just stepped over, it executed it and it ran to the next line, which was 32, which all statuses. But you can see on line 30 that there's a method call called getTimePeriod for orders. If you want to step into that, then you use step into. So in part of our step navigation, you can either step over it, you can step into the next method call. So if you want to drill into the code, you do it gradually line by line. There's another feature there, which has got a little tooltip called for step into. That's if you want to step into anything that is included in your vendor folder. So effectively, if you want to debug anything that is fetched via Composer, if you want to debug any kind of third-party libraries that might be doing something unexpected. The next one is step out. That is when you just want to, in the current method you're in, you just want to execute to the end, come out of it, and come up to the end of the call point that it came from. And finally, on this round, you've got run to cursor, which is fairly, for fine detail of debugging, this is one that I use all the time. The cursor, for instance, at the moment is on line 30. And if I put the caret, I scroll down on line 45, on that line, show sign up dashboard message equals false. If I run to cursor, hey presto, it runs, it's just done it. It's run all of the PHP to that point. And as a result, the call stack updates on the left, because you're on line 45 now, and your variables are all updated in real time because you have complete visibility of all of your runtime, which is quite cool. So that's kind of that's a bit of that's a primer for navigation. I'm going to show you some debugging in practice now, and I'm going to do it via. I mentioned that we are religious with our TDD at Jump 24. So obviously with this project, we have a full test suite that runs very slowly. We'll get onto that. But I'm going to do some live debugging and I'm going to do it via the test suite. And the reason why I'm doing it via the test suite instead of doing it via the web side of it is because this is a classic example where you have, if you're testing via PHP unit, if you're doing sort of browsery semi stuff like using BrowserKit, your visibility is quite low with what you're testing. So with this, with using Xdebug and then stepping through, you have far more visibility of what's going on. So it goes something like this, and I'll show you. Let's go to and stop that first of all. There we go. And I'm going to turn off the debugger. So I have a test. Run this in the container, and the test is called. I need to run. Is it? Yeah, vendor binary PHP unit, and I have a test called. Use the filter command, and it's called can add item to order. And It's in snake case before you question it, because all the variable methods got really, really descriptive and long. And so Pascal case, not Pascal case, camel case didn't look very nice. Run that test. If I prepared my talk correctly, this will fail. And then my praying is over and my nerves go down a little bit. It's failed, and it's failed because it wanted a 200 and it's got a 422. And a 422 is a HTTP unprocessable entity. It's a unit test that tests a controller. So it's doing stuff like it's sort of trying to emulate, the front end. So you don't really have much visibility other than it just failed and it wanted that and it got that instead. So add to order test 114 is where it's failed. So if we go to the code, just close all this stuff, and we'll have a look at the test, which is can add item to order to cart for a new order to order. There it is. There we go. And it was, what was it again? Line 114. There we go. From line 108, I'm going to post some JSON to this endpoint, and then on line 114, I'm going to assert that I got an HTTP OK, but I didn't. I got an HTTP unprocessable entity. So the reason why it differs doing Xdebug like this is because if you're going to do it the old school way, you dump out bits of the response and you keep on running the test over and over again. But with Xdebug, we can interrupt it and find out what it's doing and failing and why. So we need to look at the routes this is going through. So this is add to order test. So it's using with that endpoint. I'm not going to go through the routes file, but if you look at the routes file, it's using a route that maps to a controller called add to order. So I try and find that add to order. From controller. Might be add item to add API add item to order. Well, okay, so there's a thing called API add item to order request. And that is used by that's used by add controller. That was what I was looking for. This is the controller for that endpoint, and it's called add controller. So if I got 422, so it's moaning. So if I add a breakpoint in there, let's see. This is going to be slightly different, and this is because I've got a little bit more time, so I'm going to see what happens. So if I add a breakpoint there, it's running a test. So a test is no different from the web version of it. So it should stop when I run the test. It should stop at that point. So I'm going to switch on the debugger. There we go. And I'm going to see what happens when I run this. I'm not sure if it's going to actually trigger or not. This is why this kind of stuff is. This is why this kind of approach is key. It's not triggered the breakpoint, which means it's not getting to that controller. If it's not getting that controller, that means it's hitting something before and failing. So and then returning a response before I get to the controller. So if I go to here, go to this controller, we had API add item to order request as a custom request. This is a Laravel thing. You can do the same thing in Symfony, where you basically customize the incoming request and you add rules to it. So authorized true, you can do custom sort of logic on there. There's a thing called public function rules, and this is actually a sort of an interfacey design thing, and it has a set of rules identified here. So this is probably being run. So if I switch off that breakpoint here in the controller is not being hit, which means I can take that off because it makes no difference. But if I go into the request where it's being validated and put a breakpoint there, this should be hit because this is in the business logic. This is earlier up in the call stack, right? And so if I run the test again, I didn't touch that. Test stops, and it brings up PhpStorm into the foreground for me, which means we have hit that. Cool. So I'm going to use the step functions now to step over what it's moaning about. So it returns a load of configuration stuff. It's this payload, right? If I just make that a little bit bigger and gradually go through return attributes, okay. So it's trying to okay. So we're hitting something called like you can see in line 108, we're now hitting something called validator. So it's hitting the validator with these rules in the framework itself. Setting the validator, hitting the container. It's doing some service. It's doing some inversion of control and service control stuff, right? And extensions to the validator. Return validator. If method exists, this with validator. I don't know what this stuff is, but I'm kind of like pigeon reading it. Return this validator. Okay, cool. Now we've hit a pivotal point in the application, because on line 25 we've got an if condition, and it's if instance fails. If it fails, then it's gonna go to line 26. If it doesn't, then it will go to line 29, which will be this past validation. I run it, and instead of going to line 29, it goes to line 26, which is this failed validation. It's failed validation. We sort of know that it's failing validation, but what does it look like? That's the interesting thing. We've got this variables panel here. So if I expand on these, this is all like a sort of a navigable tree, right? There's an array called failed rules here. And if I expand that, it's got variant ID. And the first key is required. So we've got failed rules, variant ID required. Okay. If I go to the request, it says variant ID required, and it should be an integer here. So going to stop that now. Move the debugger. What are we giving? What's the request in the test? The request in the test is this JSON post blah 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 variable order item payload. So if I scroll, what's that? There it is from line 97. Merchant, inventory ID, inventory options. There's no inventory ID. So not inventory ID, variant ID. Variant. So if I put in variant ID, which I think it's missing, and I should have an entity. This is kind of by the by, really. I mean, this is like logic that this is like, the code that's particular to this code base. But do I have a variant? Their inventory variant ID. Okay. Clear that. Run. I didn't switch off the debugger, so I reckon it's going to pause. Which actually is an excuse to, there we go. What I should have done for my hurrah moment is actually switch off the debugger. But the good news is that on the debugger, it lets me show off something else. Where the tooltip is here on the mid left-hand side, there is something called resume program execution, which will run the program until the next breakpoint that you've set. I haven't set any other breakpoints, so I'm just going to resume it. And nothing else seems to have happened. So if I go back to the terminal, our test has passed. And that was live debugging. And that's kind of live debugging from an actual kind of use cases, similar use cases that we've actually done. Cool. Let's do some other funky stuff. Watches. Watches are fun. You can do, watches are not sort of some sort of crazy advanced features. They're quite standard. You can see them in, if you open up DevTools in JavaScript, you can just set a watcher on something, and yeah, it's very standard stuff. But I'll just show you an example when live coding this project that I've done personally. Maybe one of my peers has done, Jump 24. So in the panel here, in the debugging panel, you've got a variables panel, and you've got the call stack panel, which has kind of gone away because it's not active at the moment. But on the right-hand side, this is the watches panel. So it allows you to set a watcher on a particular variable. So a good example of setting this, looking at this in action. If I close everything and I go back to our dashboard controller. And I want to keep an eye on line 40, which is a variable called dashboard metrics. And it is a variable returned from a repository method called get front end statistics for merchant with date range. Nice and descriptive, because we're always going ever more Java-like in PHP. I'm going to put a breakpoint there. And then I'm going to run, I mean, I can run it from, I'll run it through the web, I'll run it through the web end, which makes sense. Debug is listening, Okay, good. Don't worry about that. That's the timeout from the last time I run this. I'm going to refresh the page. Instead of showing me the result, it stops and puts me into the IDE. And we're at our breakpoint. So at our breakpoint now, we've got our paused runtime. Show it how it was before there with our call stack on the left, variable panel in the middle, and our watchers. I'm going to add a new watcher, and I'm going to add a watcher for dashboard metrics. Dashboard metrics. Cool. So press return and nothing happens. It says it can't evaluate the expression. And the reason why is because we're on line 40. It hasn't been set yet. So if I do our step over into the next line. So we've stepped out of line 30. Now we're on all statuses. Step over that. Dashboard metrics, we're on this line right now, and press return. And then suddenly on the right-hand side, the pane changes from can't evaluate this to it's an array of 4. If I expand that, it shows me what the array is, which is a key of new order, processing completed and rejected, and there's integers of 3, 8, 8, 8, 3. And yeah, so that's a watcher in progress, right? Let's show you an example of that running with stuff happening to that variable that you might warrant using a watcher for. So dashboard metrics is going to now be something else. So on line 40 we set it, and now on line 45 I'm going to say dashboard metrics equals this my mystery method, and it takes a array of dashboard metrics. That's basically going to mutate the array. What if I mutate it again? Dashboard metrics equals this my other mystery method. These names are generally comedy and arbitrary, but imagine that it is a load of legacy spaghetti code all over the place and you have no idea and you can't be bothered to drill down with everything. That's the scenario that I'm presenting to you. I've left the watcher on there. I've got the breakpoint on there. I'm going to run the request again. Cool, we're paused. Can't value expression because we haven't run it yet. Let's go to the point it does run. There we go. It's run. Dashboard metrics equals an array of 4 with new order, processing completed, rejected, 8, 8, 8, 3, 3, 3. I'm going to run line 45, which is my mystery method. There we go. Dashboard metrics equals 4, and it's exactly the same. And now I'm going to run my other mystery method. Run dashboard metrics equals 108, 103, 10, 26. The array is completely mutated, which means that in a hypothetical debugging situation, I know that if I go to my mystery method and in the code base now, here we go, navigating to it, my mystery method takes an array of dashboard metrics and it returns dashboard metrics because nothing happens. I put a lovely line on 100 there. Return useless comment. Nothing happens, but we know nothing happens because nothing happened on our watcher. But if we go to my mystery method, we know something happens. So I'm going to navigate to it. And my other mystery method takes metrics and then it goes for each metrics as elements passed by reference, and then adds a random integer of 1 to 150, and that's a watcher in action. Hooray. Runtime modification is where things get I get very sort of excited, and I squeal a little bit. Runtime modification in Xdebug is, if you want to, you saw me complete a request, and you can do that. You can resume program, and it will just resume it. So, but also you can actually interrupt it, and then once you've we're interrupting with breakpoints. What I mean is you can interrupt it and then resume. When you resume, whatever you've modified still counts. It still outputs the request, right? We at PHP, one of the biggest advantages of our programming language is the fact that we manage state incredibly well. If I just stop the debugger, and these dashboard metrics things here, I'm going to take them out, but we know they exist and we know what they do. And if I switch off the debugger and then run the request again, this dashboard loads, and you can see on the web on the web portion of it, new orders 83338. That is literally that array being just in a blade template being spat out, right? And it's a way of filtering, like, all these orders that you can see down here. So bearing that in mind, we know that we've got stuff that modifies that payload. So if we go back to here, we're going to switch on the debugger again, and we're going to hit that breakpoint, and we're going to use, once we've hit that, we're going to use the console window, which is a console window. Imagine it just like the JavaScript console window that you have, right? Everything's set. I have to do this really quickly because I always muck this up the first time because I never set the timeout limit. Refresh, hit the breakpoint. There we go. Run to the point of setting the dashboard metrics. The dashboard metrics are set. We know that by our watcher. There we go, 888. So I'm going to bring up the terminal, and in the terminal, I'm going to say dashboard metrics, and everything auto completes because it's an IDE and it can do stuff at runtime like this. Dashboard metrics now equals this, my mystery method, my other mystery method, because it's the one that mutates it. Dashboard metrics is the input. Press return as modified to 82.102.15.5. Close, resume, and now it's finished runtime. If I go back, it's completed and it's just modified runtime, which means you can really modify absolutely anything. Any of your service or your dependency injection for the whole of your application, you can do. So there we go. It's outputted it. There you go. That's runtime modification in action. Last thing out of this is conditional breakpoints. This is another quite cool one. So when you set a breakpoint, you can add a condition to it. I'm getting curious about how this is handled in VS Code now, but in PhpStorm, it looks like this. Let's just take that breakpoint off. And I'm going to put breakpoint here. Let's say in a hypothetical situation, some users have bugs, and some users are complaining, experiencing bugs, and some aren't. And you think that you might have an inkling that you know what it is, but you don't know. On a local environment, you can set a conditional breakpoint to hit it, and it will run only if the condition is met. So if you right-click on a breakpoint in PhpStorm, hopefully it should be visible. It's kind of visible. You have a condition window just there. So the condition I'm going to say is merchant. I love this. Everything auto-completes as well. Merchant. And this is something set on the entity, and it's called allow table service. Don't need to explain much business logic here in this application, but if that thing is set to 1, then I want you to hit the breakpoint. And when I click away from it, you can just about make out a little blue thing there. That is a little question mark, and that is a that lets you know that the breakpoint is conditional. So breakpoint is active, and the listener is on. So if for the sake of argument, I'm just going to log out. and I'm going to log in as a merchant again. And I logged in as test at test.com, and I log in. Dashboard loads, nothing happens. Okay. I'm not going to panic. That was supposed to happen. I'm going to log out. Merchant login. Here's one I prepared earlier. This is test2 at test.com. And I'm going to log in. And it's just taken me to PhpStorm, and it's just taken me to the debugger. I didn't think of doing this before, actually, but if you're wondering what this thing is, if I bring up the evaluation, I go to merchant, press return, it gives me the merchant. These are loads of ORM kind of wrapped stuff, which is the eloquent active record style. But if you did this in Symfony, you'd have the doctrine kind of style. If I go to merchants to array, it makes things a bit nicer. And you can see there should be, there we go, allow table service is an integer of 1. And that's why it was hit. That's a conditional breakpoint. Hurrah. That is pretty much our whistle-stop tour of that, of all of the features of using it. So there's kind of just like some bonus content now. So anyway, to just wrap up that bit of just watching it in progress, please stop saying escape to exit full screen. Thank you. That was our demo, but which contained breakpoints, console, and steps, watches, dynamic stack trace navigation, conditional breakpoints, runtime modification, and the only thing that's missing, and we'll get onto this because it's a little bit more advanced, but profiling. So it's worth noting when I think more about this topic of the way that we investigated Xdebug and started using it, that breakpoints, console, and steps, and watches, and conditional, all of this stuff is like, I mean, I'm not going to say PHP is special in any of this. This is all really standard stuff. I think just from the makeup of PHP, it's a bit weird the way that it's somebody's library that is the kind of the standard that we should be using, but it's not built in. Like, you know, like Python has like a built-in kind of stuff for this, but PHP has a different history. So that's the reason why it is the way it is. So they still can, you know, they still can be. I'm still going to compare them to cars because that's you know, holding on to our very sort of slither of comedy. So the sports casual version of all of these things. So breakpoints, console, and steps is Ford Mondeo territory, right? In Ruby or Python or JavaScript, you know, or Node.js or front end or whatever, you know, this is expected stuff. How many times have you run console.log or console.table if you're very funky? And watches as well. If you open up your browser right now, you can set a watcher on something. But the way that Xdebug works with its interruption of runtime with dynamic stack navigation, stack trace navigation, navigating through a complex return, request and response lifecycle like that is fairly cool, which is why I've upped the game to a BMW Mini. The conditional breakpoints thing is just something that I love, and I'm going to put it in there because I found it so like mega useful. Runtime modification of just imagine the scenario of just getting a complex legacy thing that's been ported to Docker so you can run it locally, and it has like sort of seeders and things like that make that so that you can actually have like a really big version of it, or you can connect it to a huge old UAT version or something like that. Runtime modification, the ability to take an entire huge request and response cycle and then modify that output to see what happens, that goes into Audi TT territory for me. I think that's very cool. And the profiling bit, that's Audi TT as well. In case you're wondering what the profiling bit is, I haven't done it yet, so I'm going to do it right now. This was the kind of start of. This was the kind of the profiling bit. Really was moving on. Was like us moving on our R&D of like, can we use this like for developers on the ground, so we're each in our own little sort of container doing our own little development bit. What if you empowered them to do to read into profiling for every single feature and branch they're doing? So we're going to use Xdebug obviously and Docker for this stack. We're going to use a container which you can get off Docker Hub called WebGrind, which is written in PHP, and that is a fairly straightforward application that reads cache grind files, which is the file format that Xdebug outputs for profiling. And this is what it looks like. So first of all, we need to get the container up and running. So if I stop all of this gubbins, bye. Stop that. And what am I doing? Close that. Docker Compose. And in Docker Compose, I want a new container, and I'm going to call it. I'm going to paste this in because no one's got time to do all the typing. Ain't nobody got time for that. WebGrind. Make sure our YAML is lovely because I want to be like all the DevOps people, and all the DevOps people are fluent in YAML. That doesn't right. That doesn't look right. What are you doing? That looks right. Does that look right? WebGrind, container name, image, and then no, that's not. Tabs versus spaces, right? Let's make sure that we indent full. Tabs versus spaces is a throwback to my for anyone that saw my talk last year. Cool. So that's set up, and with that set up, that reads cache grind file. So now we need to enable the profiler in Xdebug, and we do it by going to our ini file that we set up originally that has this one, and we're going to switch on the profiler. Xdebug profiler enable 1, and Xdebug profiler output directory is where I'm going to put the cache grind files. And this is very important and very, very fiddly to set up. But I'm putting the cache grind files in the storage Xdebug directory. So it's the storage is the public Laravel directory for this framework. For Symfony, there's something similar. I can't remember. It might be called the same thing actually, or it might share components for whatever those frameworks are actually vaguely still sharing components. And it's the path in the Docker container. And that's kind of like, it's quite key to the bit that I found fiddly was setting up the paths properly. So with that in mind, that's where it's outputting it in the Docker Compose file for WebGrind. I'm mounting the Xdebug directory, the storage Xdebug directory. And this is where it gets a bit confusing. I'm mounting it to temporary in the file system because that's where WebGrind reads. Basically, WebGrind, when you open up that container, anything that's in its temporary directory in its container will just read that. So this is configuring the parts. If you want to give me either questions or ask about it later, let me know, and I'll just try and recall how painstaking this was to set up to get the right configuration. With that in place, I'm going to do a Docker Compose down. Let's exit out of the container. Docker Compose down. Down we go. Cool. And Docker Compose up. Run it as a daemon. Run build, just in case I don't have the image. I do have the image. Good. Docker processes. I should have something called WebGrind. There it is at the bottom. Good. That is set to port 8081. So if I go to here and open up a new tab, 8081. So it's localhost 8081. Localhost 8081. That should be something called WebGrind. There it is. That's our mini container application running. We need to generate a cache grind file. So we need to actually profile our application. That's what we're here for. That's what we're doing. So with the profiler on, if I refresh the page, I'm going to let it somewhat complete at the moment because profiling is mega heavy because it is profiling the entire process. The question is it going to complete in some sort of decent time? Probably not. But the good thing is that it is generating the file. So if I go to WebGrind, I should be able to refresh it and see the file being generated. I want to show 100% of auto. Oh, there we go. So, so far, the entry point to this application has generated 5 megabytes of cache grind information. You know, that's what you do with profiling. If I update that, and I'm going to zoom in here so that you can see what's going on. This is not just the call stack. This is absolutely everything in terms of how many times a method was invoked, the cost in terms of milliseconds, and it's a fairly substantial. The cache grind files are quite detailed, and the profiler is quite detailed. An example of this is if I go to, I can filter by invocation count. So if I do that, I can find, I want to find out the thing that's the things that are run that are being called the most, for instance. So at the moment, for instance, in here, PHP's the standard library is null and is array is the thing that's been called the most, and something sort of Laravelli. Here we go. There we go. Array is this. So if I just expand that. A function in the a method called exists in the array wrapper for their smart arrays, which are called collections. That's been called 1,133 times. I mean, this is like, you know, it's profiling your application very well, but if you hit on show call graph, which is a button just in the top right hand corner, it draws a call graph of in SVG format of your entire application's stack. And I'm just gonna, like, how much zoom? That's just about enough zoom. It's not really readable, but this is the entire PHP runtime here, which for a tool of just rolling out Xdebug and switching on the profiler, empowering a developer is pretty powerful stuff. The only thing remains really is to actually let the developer work out what this stuff means. But it's hard, you know, from like a quick example, if you look at where the call graph is going and where the most activity is, I can zoom in at a point on the graph. What have we got? Like, there's lots of activity around here. I didn't expect to see that, actually. That's me talking to myself. So, you know, a load of those lines in the middle of there are all going to something called Blade SVG service provider, which is rendering all of the SVGs in Blade templates. The power that this thing holds is pretty strong. So, which just really remains to sort of conclude about how that's the start of profiling, but the conclusions we got from, first of all, starting to roll out Xdebug to see if we could use it as you know, as part of our stack as a company, and then how we go from this profiler, from just it being a load of complex stuff that's unreadable to maybe something a bit more. So the conclusion really is, so the start of this talk was we have standards, and we have a stack of stuff that we use to ship code. And do we include Xdebug in that? The most common argument for that usually is, no, I don't have time. And it's usually on a personal development. Like, sometimes, I mean, I've worked in places where the answer to that question of whether you should do it is, it's up to you. It's up to the individual developer. And you try and do it, and you're like, this is a complex thing. Some of it is in Docker, or I might have to try and set it up locally. Time is money. And your company will be like, why are you faffing around? If you want to set up Xdebug in Docker, then you have to do it in your own time. Time is money, but it's also an investment. So we started seeing the benefits of individually doing this, of what if we research this and what if we roll it out? And so we did. And as a result, why not level up your team? That's what we found. It levels up all of your, like, there's a host of us. If there's like 10 developers on a project, and you say, what you've been given to work on in this project is, here are the repositories. Here's the installation process for how you install it. By the way, when you're in development mode, our DevOps engineers have rolled out Xdebug, and you just switch it on. This is how you use it. And suddenly, you're giving all of your developers from junior to senior level the ability to navigate an entire call stack and look at how a framework works. That levels up your developers, which is a subject that is very dear to my heart, of making sure that your developers are progressing in their careers and they're happy, because that's what you want, the medium between your company as a business making money, and also making sure you've got harmony with making sure that your people are leveling up as well. Watch out when you do this. Don't put this in production. That's like a stupid thing to say, but the warning is that even in debugging stuff for larger Docker stacks, or especially if you've got pipelines where you're using like the Elastic Container Service, or you're doing stuff, you're orchestrating DevOps over various platforms and things, it's slow. Derek has addressed this very much by his runtime for Xdebug 3 being a lot faster, where he streamlined like how the C runs. I think it's in C, isn't it? So yeah, it's a lot faster, but make sure that if you want to roll this out, and it will be massively beneficial, make sure that you've got your restraints in progress, to make sure that stuff like the ini file that I gave, like make sure that you've got restraints in your process to make sure that doesn't get into production. And the profiling stuff we started to link into, as I mentioned before, but our next kind of thing that we're looking into now is, if you're empowering your developers to give them the ability to look at a full profile of a PHP call stack, and then look at where the blockers are in a call graph, and where you might find, I mean, this is the ability to preempt things like N+1 SQL queries and stuff like this. Once you've empowered your developers with that and looking into that, why not? We practice TDD. Why not do PDD, which I've coined, which almost certainly someone else has coined as well? Performance-driven development. Why not start looking at, before you ship a feature, you've already looked at, you've been given the tooling to look at and analyze whether this thing is going to be efficient or not. Because my God, the amount of code you can ship that's efficient from there is going to be quite cool. That leads us into conversations like Blackfire.io and stuff like that. But that's kind of a conversation for, that's another talk maybe. So there we go. That's me. I'm done. That's how we turbocharged our process. We rolled it out amongst almost all of our projects, I think. And it's proving to be super, super useful. I've been Jim Seconde, friendly developer advocate and tired dad. And I guess, how much time did I run over by?
I think we're all scrabbling to unmute. I wasn't really tracking everyone. I think it's only been about 15 minutes, maybe. But no,
it's a long talk, and you can't leave out features. So maybe I leave out the profiling thing. I don't know.
Dave, you managed to unmute?
Right. Yes. Yeah, I think we had a couple of questions. Well, I had a question actually. You mentioned that on your projects everyone does TDD. If everyone is doing TDD, how often do you actually have to resort to using a debugger?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I had to do it. A good example of this is I had to do it today, and I hadn't. And it's a good example because I did it today, but I hadn't done it for quite a while. And it's the project that we're working on now is not kind of a legacy project, but it's been around for about 4 or 5 years, and there are new members of the team, and I'm a new member to this project, right? I've never seen it before, and I'm adding a new feature. I'm adding a new feature to the code base, and something failed. The tests failed, and the tests failed. The reason why it became so prevalent of where Xdebug worked so well was because it was sort of getting into microservice territory, where it was about 5 or 6 different code bases talking to each other, which means that exceptions were being thrown, and then down the call stack were just being thrown back to the response of an object. And so it was saying, okay, and here's your response. And the response is, the parameter expects the response code to be an integer, but you didn't give me an integer. And you look at it and go, this is absolute nonsense. What the hell is this? Xdebug this morning allowed me to actually drill into that, which was something being set far up, which ended up being it was a default. It was a field had no default value, and it was a SQL error. But because of the way the try catch was working further up, it meant that there was no way you'd be able to catch it, and that's because of someone else's code 4 years ago. There's no way you would have been able to catch that. So for stuff that comes up that is just like for day to day, I suppose we don't use it. Like we don't need to resort to the debugger loads, but we are, at Jump 24, we are an agency, and some of our stuff that we write, we plan, and all the stuff we plan, we know exactly, we've got all of the domain knowledge in our head, and we planned it. And some of the stuff we take on someone else's code that's 6 years old and is an absolute hot mess of nonsense. When it comes to that, or it comes to legacy refactoring, that's where it's vital. That's where we found it to be vital anyway.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So I think we've got a question also from Sean. We have found that running Xdebug adds an overheads to the code. We've had memory limits exceeded on our local dev environments with it on and had to turn it off. Sometimes we will get around this by not having auto start turned on. Anyone else found this? Or have you found that? Yeah.
I personally haven't. I personally haven't encountered that, but that's because our DevOps engineer is very particular about don't switch on all the things, and that's because it's the foresight of knowing that it's Xdebug 2 is very, very memory inefficient. And you know what? You can see why from either the profile. I mean, that's with the profiler switched on, but without the profiler switched on, you saw the level the fact that it's the call stack logs everything, and you have access to the variables at any point in time for the entire stack of runtime. So, and obviously the performance is lethal. It's awful. So yeah, we are aware of it, but the kind of from the start, I think that engineering are very particular about make sure that it's not switched, make sure that everything isn't switched on by default. And if it is, then it's switched on. You have to force it in, and you have to force in the breakpoint to make it as efficient memory-wise as possible. When I've encountered this, Eric, who will be able to instantly tell you the answer to this, whereas I don't think I can. Which is, I mean, my solution at the moment is memory -1 for anything that's causing a particular problem, and that's my 2-hour debugging slot just for putting a memory limit without boundaries, and that's to debug one thing. If you leave it off, obviously it's complete carnage, and it'll just make your system fall over. I think that to enhance this talk, that would probably be the thing that I would want to look into, and the thing that we'd want to look into as a company of how do you progress from just giving everyone debugging tools to how do you take a massive legacy application and make it efficient to debug, because it's hard. Okay,
Sean, if you want to come back on any further questions to that, then just pop it in chat. Has anyone else got any questions? There's a Q&A tab if you just want to pop that open and add your question.
I don't think we've had any more questions come through, so I want to say thank you very much to Jim for speaking this evening.